Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts Ariana and Seth.
This is the Pop Cult Podcast. I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And today we have two not European films, two non-English films, we'll say. A little later, we're going to be talking about Alice Rohrwacher's La Chimera. But first, we are going to be doing a review of Totem, a film from Mexico by director Lila Aviles. In this film, 7-year-old Sol spends the day at her grandfather's home helping to prepare a surprise party for her father. Throughout the day, chaos slowly takes over and fractures the family's foundations. So, this movie, I'd heard it was good. I just didn't know how good it was until I watched it.
Yes.
What are your general thoughts on Totem?
Totem felt very authentic of that feeling of how you get when you're a child and slowly the adult world is creeping in on you. And you're starting to realize that you can't live in this world of fantasy or even just being by yourself with your own thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
It felt very realistic. It felt very true. Thinking back about like hanging around like either aunts or uncles or my grandmother's house while waiting for something to happen and ending up peaking on adult conversations that you should not be a part of, or when adults are trying to speak in code but you know who or what they're talking about. That has been a stress amongst the family. It is incredibly well acted, especially the acting from the kids, which was not something I was expecting.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times when I see like it, it's led by a child, I'm very much like, okay, I can't expect too much, but this surpassed a lot of what my expectations were going to be.
Yeah, I would say it is a perfect film. There is not a single flaw with this movie. Everything that Aviles sets out to do, she accomplishes. She gets across the tone, the feel of the room, the characters. Everything is shot in really tight close-ups for a big chunk of the film.
Mm-hmm.
And that creates this intimacy that she creates in it that brings the movie to the point that it almost feels like you're watching a documentary.
Yes,
Because it feels so real. This feels like an experience that this is a real family that is really going through this, and we're there with a camera to capture it.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things was when we saw Nuri for the first time.
That's the mother.
She's one of the sisters, like she's one of Sol's aunts.
Oh yeah, she's the one whose hair is cut very
Yes.
short. Yeah.
And when you see her short hair and you're kind of getting the implications, nobody really like is saying it out loud,
But culturally that sticks out.
yeah, it's like Sol, the girl that's the main character, is asking why can't she see her father before the party? He needs to get some rest.
And it feels like she has been separated from her father for a while.
Yeah.
Because he's living at his parents' home.
Yeah, he's living on a small house on his parents' property. And she isn't able to see her father and is going through the emotions of the fact that like she's been denied over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that her mother's keeping her away. There's also like that interesting manner that she is dropped off by her mom because her mom has to go to work. Her mom works in the theater.
Mm-hmm.
And then Nuri has very short cropped hair, and then it's later revealed as to why she has short cropped hair. And
there's also a sense that this is a sort of intellectual, artistic family.
Yes.
Because the grandfather is a professor.
I think he's a therapist.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah. But that's another interesting little detail because he's had his vocal cords like removed
probably from throat cancer.
And so he has the electronic voice box. So like his voice adds this like unique texture to the movie.
Yeah, it also like adds like a like it is very astonishing because we do see him with a client. I'm assuming it's a client because of how like open she is.
Yeah.
And that like he's doing it at his home, uh, for the voice bucks against his neck, and you're just like, ooh,
That's
would I
unexpected.
have a therapist that has that? And then, um, also the controversy of like, it seems like multiple people are living in the house in order to help with the dad,
Care for Tona, the
for
father.
Tona. Um, so you have Nori there with her daughter, who like I think she looks like she's maybe 4 or 5.
He's younger than Soul.
Younger than Soul, kind of has very much like telenovela delivery on her words. She's like that precocious child that can speak more than she has to.
Well, then there's Cruz, who's the nurse. She's like a hospice nurse
Yes, Cruz is the
who
hospice
is
nurse.
such an interesting character.
Yes, and then there's the other sister that I'm trying to figure out what her name is. I think is Esther. Who brings in like a supernatural witchy person
Like a
during the
shaman.
party.
Yeah.
And that felt very like I would not be surprised if they brought an authentic person and just told them like go through the house and do your spiel as you normally would.
Well, because I was thinking of you coming from a Latin American Caribbean background, there were probably a lot of things in here
Oh yeah,
that were like you experienced that as a child.
yeah, like her aunt like having her hair up because she just dyed it, and then having to wash it out on the sink because the other aunt took too long in the bathroom. The tense conversations that even as a child you're picking up, like, ooh, something's not going right here. Uh, Also like the very authentic response with like Nuri leaves for a bit. She wants to go to the market, and her daughter is wailing and crying and
Clinging onto her leg, yeah.
clinging onto her leg and begging her not to leave. And then like it turns out like Esther's got 2 older kids who like also live with her but are not that much a part of the story.
Well, because they're old enough that they kind of have their own things
Yeah,
going
they
on.
kind of have their own thing, and then like the way that they're styled, which doesn't surprise me because like um it's Mexico. Mexico's always had their own kind of style that like has clung to what the USA has for the like 1960s and 70s, and then like 80s, kind of like a retro style that I remember where you were watching the film and you're like, wait, what year is it? Because the girl had like bangs in a certain way, like almost
Yeah.
kind of a little bit, what would you call like that? It's
Flock of Seagulls kind of.
no. It's getting like popular now. Like it's supposed to be like it's like what they call business in the front, party in the back.
Mullet.
Yes,
Yeah.
kind of a mullet hairstyle. And like the ending was so
Well, you're
haunting.
getting ahead of it here. You need to calm down.
Calm down.
There's so much to talk about. So I looked it up, and this is Lila Avila's second feature film.
Okay.
She previously directed a film called The Chambermaid in 2018, which at this point is on the must-watch list.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I gotta say. And apparently the main actress in that movie helped her in the casting of this movie.
Oh, that's very
And
interesting.
I don't think she's in the movie. I don't
Okay.
So Aviles cited John Cassavetes as an inspiration, and I
Oh
immediately thought of
my.
what you could call the beautiful chaos of a woman under the influence.
Yes.
Because she said it was a lot of improvisation because that was how she created the intimacy, because people were saying things in the moment in reaction to what other people were saying, and so it gave it that sense of like, oh, we're with a real family going through this kind of chaotic
Like
moment.
hearing that as her influence, it's obviously a stamp on there because again, like you were like calling back what you were saying before, it felt like watching a documentary. It felt like
Like the camera person didn't know where they needed to point or what was going to happen next.
But it was also just done so well that there were some shots that felt like this is what we're going for. It's fine.
Well, it's those moments stand out because I think there's these big improvised moments, but then there's clearly moments that Aviles wants in this movie.
Yeah.
Because she has it in her head of how it's going to look, and you can tell the difference, but there isn't like
it's not
there's no
shocking.
Yeah, there's no friction between these things. They just flow into each other.
And it just seemed almost seamless.
Well, because those planned big moments they feel even more profound because in the middle of this chaos, there's this scene that happens and it just like stops everything.
Yeah.
Uh, he also, Tona, when he sees Soul, calls her my Ponyo. And I was like, yes, there is a Miyazaki influence on the look of this movie because everything, the natural world is such a part of this movie.
Yeah.
Like the garden outside the house, the animals that Soul interacts with, there's the snails,
Yeah.
there's the parakeet, there's a dog in the house, right? And I think there's a cat. And so it's, to me, those things were reminders of, oh, despite what's happening in this home, there is a natural world that just keeps going regardless of who is born, who dies, tragedies that befall us, that nature persists. It just keeps going. And so I felt that the nature kind of grounds Soul when she's in this very uncertain period. It's sort of like, oh, well, the animals will be there. And that's something I don't have to think
when
about.
she's being mischievous at times, she
Yeah.
uses the animals in order to get her point across. And it's like, it's not exactly that she's being neglected. It is that the adults don't want to have to regard the pain that she is possibly going to have to endure.
Well, because her father's at the center of this, and to sit down and talk to her means you have to, as an adult, take in the weight of like, you know, that in a short while, this little girl's life is just going to become so miserable and so awful
it's also
that they're just like, I can't do that yet.
Well, it's also that her life is already miserable to a certain extent.
And she just hasn't. We'll talk about her processing because the film gives us that scene and it's just like a sledgehammer. So they found the house in Mexico. Apparently, Aviles was very particular about what house. Every piece of furniture was built from scratch because none of the furniture in the house matched what she had in mind. So she got production people to build everything in the house.
Oh boy. I mean, I couldn't have told you, like, I couldn't tell.
Everything looked weathered and like
everything looked weathered.
It looked like an old person's house with a bunch of knickknacks and shit around.
And it still looked nice. It was just like, it looked lived in. So it's just this curiosity of the process of what she was picturing. It was she going by memories that she had herself as a child, or was it just sort of like
she said it was based on a personal story that she is aware of.
Okay.
So it may not be some, and at the end it's dedicated, it says to my daughter. So I'm not sure, like, and in the interview I saw, it didn't really go into detail. That's as much as she would say, as it was based on a true story she was aware of.
Okay.
So I think it's a film in which the lighting and the cinematography is about as perfect as you can get. Like this movie looks flawless. There is not a single scene that is out of focus when it's not meant to be. There's not a scene that's framed in a way that's ugly. Like you could drag your slider while you're watching this movie to any point, and wherever you stop, the scene's going to look beautiful.
There's like this amazing scene that like Soul looks to be looking out of a window, and her uncle comes in and is interacting with her younger like cousin, and then when it shifts over, you start to realize like we're looking through the window. It's not as we're watching like her watch them kind of thing. She actually has her back towards them. It is shot so well.
It's layers and reflections. So it's she's in front of the like sliding door windows, and in the windows you can see the garden reflected. So it's just like almost a forest.
Yeah.
And then you have her, who, based on what we're seeing, is in the middle of the forest. But then further behind her, barely in view, but we can certainly hear them, are what you're saying, the grandfather and the cousin.
Uncle and cousin.
Uncle. And it's just this, it feels like you're inside, but you're also outside at the same time, which I think represents what's going on in her head, because it's one of those moments where no one's really interacting with Soul. So it's like she is in the house, but she's also somewhere else.
Yeah, and like another scene that's close to that feeling is when she has gathered a bunch of like pillows around her.
She made like a little fort.
And then her aunt's like, you've made a mess, come clean it up. And I like the fact that we don't have it's focus solely on Soul, so the aunt feels like she's towering over her, and then Soul does like this slow like movement of not wanting to be interrupted in her thoughts. She picks up a notebook while she says to her aunt, "Yes, I'm gonna help you clean," but she's delaying. She's waiting for this adult to leave her so she can be by
Well,
herself.
she's constantly moving through the house and then finding places to be alone. So it almost feels like this ebb and flow through the movie of she wants to be around other people. And then she'll have these moments where she wants to be away from everyone.
Yeah,
And then she wants to be around other people and this back and forth.
it's this back and forth, especially because like the first shots are her in the car with her mother, and her mother then fixes like a clown outfit that she has on, only to be get into the house and immediately her cousin is like, "I hate what you're wearing. You look dumb." Even though the adults are like, "Look how cute," but she is solely focused on what her cousin is saying. Like it is this thing that like people don't know how to, the adults again don't know how to regard soul. So she has conflict of wanting to be near them because it feels as if the only time that they want her around is if she's on acts of service, meaning she's helping clean, meaning that she's like giving her aunt paper towels, like as she like dries off the dye off her hair, like she is, nobody's asking her like what her interests are until she encounters her father.
Uh, and then one thing Avila said in a interview I read, where she said the film to her is about spirals. And the way she described that was how each year you have a birthday, but you're often in a different place every time you have a birthday. So it's this, you're experiencing something that feels the same, but there's something very different about it.
Ooh. Oh.
And so you think about, oh, she's having, because is it his birthday? Is that the party they're so, because I wasn't sure if it's birthday or they're just having a party because of other things that are going on.
I think it's supposed to be that it is his birthday.
Or maybe they're going to celebrate his birthday because he's probably not going to make it to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And there's also, like I said, discussions between the siblings about his condition while using code between, so the kids aren't aware. But you could obviously tell by the way that Soul is
She
kind of sitting in
knows.
the corner.
Yeah.
She knows what they're talking about.
And there were little things like Nuria is obsessed with making a cake the whole film. And that's clearly just her trying to distract herself with a process. Like it's a process with clearly defined steps that you know what the outcome should be. And it makes her not have to think about like her brother.
Well, it's also she doesn't want to be in the party.
Yeah.
She doesn't want to see him come in because, again, like it is two households. The house where he occupies with his sickness
And the nurse. Yeah.
and the nurse, along with his paintings, and then the main house. And then there's like questions from Soul as to why did you take my paintings off? Well, your dad wanted to be surrounded with the paintings that he grew up with, and you like find out that that's not the case at all.
Yeah. There's little things like the knickknacks around the house and how you see Soul kind of spend time just kind of like observing and inspecting these little things.
Yeah.
And those in turn represent like these are the things that are left behind when a person dies, right? This accumulation of stuff. And then we see kind of the flip of that with Tona's artwork and what happens the night of the party while everybody's having the party.
Yeah.
The art, all of his art that he's made is being sold off because of all of this debt that's been accrued. And it's this horribly bittersweet thing of he was able to create the very means by which his family will be able to sustain themselves. But to sustain themselves, they have to lose these things.
They have to give up parts of him.
Yes.
They have to sell it off and then hope that it gets the highest bidder, but not have it to hold the memory of him, to know he painted it during this time. Like the only thing that is kind of reserved is the last gift he gives to Soul.
Yeah. And then Cruz, the whole conversation about her pay, I thought was so beautifully done because it suddenly reveals all these layers to this character that you weren't aware of.
Yeah.
And then the two scenes near the end that I think are just like they are the showstopper scenes of the movie, the clown dance And the way that is shot,
It is just so good.
because the premise sounds very silly, and that it's meant to be silly, where it's Soul is on her mother's shoulders. They have a big trench coat over the two of them. Soul has on a wig, a clown wig, and she's lip syncing this like opera song or something. And instead of filming it in a wide shot, we keep the close-ups going.
Yeah.
And so it's clearly very choreographed, which is why it stands out from the more like documentary-like scenes, because the camera just like floats with her and it causes her to feel like she's floating through the room.
Yeah, that she almost seems like both a girl and a puppet that's been brought to life because of like the way her hands are moving.
Yeah.
And it has to do with the fact that she is sitting on her mother's shoulders.
But we don't see the legs at all. Everything is like
Yeah.
Soul from like shoulders up.
Yeah, and then like she's so high up close to the ceiling for how tall she's looking.
And the way the room is lit, I think,
Yeah.
adds to it. Just beautiful scene. And then the cake and candles scene,
Oh.
which the tone of the movie shifts in such a dramatic way. And I remember as we were watching it, I was like, please let that be where the movie ends. And it does. And I can't think of a more perfect way to end this movie, to really give you the full spectrum of emotion that this little girl goes through in this single day. It is a movie that I would say is a 5 out of 5. Leila Aviles is now immediately one of those directors that I'm like, whatever
That
she
you
makes,
have to
I'm
keep
watching the next
watching.
movie. I'm watching the next movie. I'm going back to see The Chambermaid. I need to see that. And I need to know, because I think in one of the interviews I saw, she said she does have a documentary in mind. And in shooting Totem, it helped give her some ideas about how she would shoot that film.
Yeah.
She didn't give any hint as to what it would be about or anything. But it has me just absolutely fascinated with her and like her philosophy of film and the way she's bringing in Cassavetes with Miyazaki, which are two things you wouldn't necessarily think
Especially
would
because
mix, but
like
they
when you
do.
think about it, it's like a Miyazaki because it's the point of view of this young girl. And then like the colors were like so
Greens and
vivid.
blues of like
Yeah, like
nature.
she's wearing a pink shirt while she's going through like the
Oh,
green
I
stuff.
forgot. Yeah, the color. I
And
forgot.
then
That was so
like in the
good.
bathroom when Nuri is like there with her daughter, it's like blue tiles and she's wearing gray, but it's standing out because she's wearing gray.
There was so much thought that went into what every frame of this movie would look like. And
Yeah.
it's an example of what good film is. And I get really annoyed when there are people that just all they do is consume garbage movies. And I get the need to, you want to tune out, you don't want to think. But like movies like this, or movies that this should be on 10 screens at a Cineplex. This should be a blockbuster movie.
Yeah.
Like it is an incredibly well-made film.
Because I think it's also like the more we talk about it, and which is the opposite of like, say, what my feelings towards Barbie was, the more I talked about it, the more I hated it. The more I talk about this film, the more I really like appreciate it and adore it because it's just sort of like it's rare instances that you can have a child lead the role that she led.
And like perfect.
But it is
Perfect.
the dialogue is not too much. Is this interesting shot that, for example, when she encounters the bird, she tries to get closer and closer to the bird, but is this also like the way it's shot, it's this understanding that this is a wild animal. It will not like obey her rules.
Well, it's a representative of like what's happening to her father.
Yeah.
It's this aspect of nature that's beyond your control.
Yeah.
You can try to capture it, you can try to control it, but ultimately it's going to do what it wants.
Yeah, and it's the questions that she's left lingering about of the situation and how nobody really wants to talk to her about it, but it's also because nobody really wants to deal with what's going to happen except the nurse. And even the nurse is like, this is not my place because she's
very devoted to Tona, but she's also not a part of this family.
Yeah, and it's like this interesting thing where she's not at no point is she like on Tona being like, your daughter's fucking waiting for you. Hurry the fuck up.
He's allowed to move at his pace, which I really like.
She will make a suggestion to him, but then allow him to make the decision as to what happens to himself next. It
He's given like the type of agency someone who is in his position would you'd want them to have.
yes.
Like you determine the pace. You determine when you're going to do this because you're the one who's in the most pain in the room.
Yeah, and it's how also like Tona himself is such an interesting character once he is within frame.
And I love how he's like hidden away from the movie for like the first 2/3 or so. We
Yeah.
don't really see him until like the middle of the movie.
Yeah. And how like despite the fact that Nori is avoiding him, he comes to her. Like he's kind of like, where are you? Where you've been? I've been outside waiting for you. And he's like kind of like joking, like everybody should be waiting for me, like kind of thing. Just also the way he talks to Soul, which is like the first time we realize how much she loves animals. Because she is showing that she loves animals because she's gifted it like a fish.
Oh yeah, her uncle. I remember
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
And then what like she doesn't talk too much. She's excited, she's happy for the fish. But then you start to realize like the importance of animals when she starts giving all these details to her dad when he shows her like, oh, here's a painting that I made with all your favorite animals, and she starts listing all the things about them.
What's that thing where like a kid becomes obsessed with something and then they just unload? It's a very autistic thing. I can relate to it.
But
Where you're just like, but she has all this knowledge about the world and the natural world.
yeah, but it's also nobody has asked her or allowed her to be that way until
Yep.
he's there.
Yep.
And now it's like getting me emotional because it's just sort of like, and that will probably be, he's probably one of the few people that she can be that way towards, that she's safe to. And that's so heartbreaking because he's going to be gone.
But yeah, great movie. And I think what frustrates me is the fact like this movie is going to be obscure to most people, while whatever Marvel fuckfest they come out with, Deadpool and Wolverine, you're gonna have all these people go and see it. But I would want to ask people, which film speaks more to what it is to live your life? Deadpool and Wolverine, or a film about a child coming to terms with death and loss? Like, I know which thing I'm going to experience in my life. I'm not going to fight in a multiversal limbo somewhere against some universal threat. That's not going to happen. But I am and have gone through the experience of losing people. And I think it's important that people see movies like this because when I look at, I can only speak really for U.S. society. It's the society I'm the most intimate and familiar with. We have a real problem of people reckoning with their own mortality and understanding themselves as just an individual who is here for a short amount of time, but is part of a continuing chain of people.
Yeah.
And this movie is about community. It's about, like Avila said, she wanted to make a choral film. Referring to that idea of like the Greek chorus, right? Where you have all these characters and they're each telling you the story through what they're doing. And its soul is kind of going around from room to room. And collectively, we get to see the whole story of what's happening here on this day. But yeah, I would say this is a movie I wholeheartedly recommend. I think everyone should see this movie.
Yeah.
It's only an hour and 35 minutes long. So it's that perfect length. And it is a movie that's going to stay with you, and you're going to see images that are going to make you a better person if you really engage with it, because you're going to really get to see how you can find beauty in sadness, that it's a very easy thing to do, that sadness is a beautiful thing to experience.
Yeah.
Arthur, played by Josh O'Connor, a young British archaeologist, gets involved in an international network of stolen Etruscan artifacts during the 1980s. He seems to possess a supernatural gift for finding tombs buried beneath the earth and goes on a spiritual odyssey that will change him forever. This is La Chimera, written and directed by Alice Rohrwacher. This is not our first encounter with her work. She's made other films. I have not seen those, but the first time I ever saw anything she made, first time you ever saw anything she made, was an episode from season 2 of My Brilliant Friend. The episode where Lena and Lilu go to the beach while there is a pregnancy happening.
Yeah.
and they become part of a love triangle.
Mhm.
And the episode that Rohrwacher directed was a very crucial episode where Linu's sort of understanding of herself and sort of all these existential things kind of come to a head. And I just remember how incredibly shot that episode was. How Rohrwacher was able to get across the sense of a young person coming into their own as an adult who's aware of themselves as being part of a larger universe. And so I was very interested to see one of Rohrwacher's films. And so we finally got to watch one, her most recent film, La Chimera. What did you think of this film?
It is controlled chaos at
Yeah,
times. And it's one of those films that feels like she likes Terry Gilliam, like
I didn't
the
see
from
him in any
Brazil.
references, but
Well,
I could.
not in reference. I mean more like
Well, when I
how,
saw her talking about the movie, she never brought him up, but I can kind of see that a little bit.
yeah, it felt as if this was a person who consumed,
She likes ragtag groups of people.
yeah, it consumed a lot of films
Yeah.
and then decided to make something completely different and new. There are times
But
that
also, it has elements of. We'll get in more about the genre aspects of
yeah,
this movie. But in terms of influences, she cited Fellini, which is something we kind of noticed just through the casting.
immediately. Not the casting, even like the like that first shot in the train.
Well, I felt like the way Fellini was always so good at casting such interesting looking people. Everyone in this movie is so interesting looking.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not how they naturally look. They maybe gave them a fake mustache or hair and makeup did something or wardrobe. But like everyone is full of visual details.
Yeah, if you were to tell me, oh, this person comes from a small town in Italy, I would believe you. It's not as if like you got like really glammed up people and then said they're from small towns and they know what being poor is like.
The other reference she cited, which I didn't think of, and then after a couple minutes I thought, "Oh, yeah, I do see that," are the Indiana Jones films.
Yeah.
Even though this is not like an Indiana Jones
No,
film.
I feel like he's like the anti Indiana Jones, and not like in a great, like, not that he's like giving it back to the people. It's more just in a sense of like, what if you took Indiana Jones
He's jaded.
and he's jaded and doing it for like the highest bidder? Um, I really liked this film because in a sense, it's telling you that he's going to reap what he sows eventually by the actions occurred in this film when you think about it. Like he swindles one person so he gets swindled back. um
Well, the film even kind of has like a Indiana Jones type villain, Spartaco.
yeah, which was like very brief.
But like when you see them and like where they confront them, it feels like a set piece from an Indiana Jones movie, except it doesn't play out like a set piece from Indiana
No.
Jones. Yeah. And that's, I love the, when I read that detail, I just thought, oh, I really like this because this debuted at Cannes the same year that Dial of Destiny did last year.
Wow.
And they said this film had a whole lot more critical acclaim than Dial of Destiny.
Of course
Yeah.
it did.
It's a movie that feels very impressionistic. We see everything through Arthur's eyes.
Yes.
Because there are moments that are clearly not real in front of him, but it's, oh, this is what's going on in his subconscious as he's viewing something.
Mm-hmm.
It's a movie that has a sort of holy feel to it in the way that like you would assume being around these statues and artifacts might feel, where you're in the presence of something that has like it's connected to something ancient.
There's a weight to it. There's an impression that like you are watching something that is very, like once he encounters like the MacGuffin that they find, it's like it is such a precious thing that it's almost wrong to have found it.
Well, the film has like reverence because what they're doing is they're tomb raiders.
Yeah.
And it has a reverence for these places, the way they're shot. Now, the characters don't have much reverence for them. They see these as opportunities to like make money. But the way the film, especially that last tomb,
Mhm.
which I love that while they're trying to get the large stone lid off it, Rohrwacher chooses to cut inside the tomb before it's been disturbed. and we can kind of hear them outside. It's muffled, but the camera just kind of like a static shot of, this, cut to another shot of a painting on the wall. And she just kind of, these are the things. And then the minute that they pull the lid off and the outside air gets in, the way you watch the paint fade on the walls, like in real time, like you just almost see the pigment kind of dissolve because it's been preserved in there for all these years. But the minute you've allowed, fresh oxygen in, it kind of ruins it.
Mhm.
And so it's a film that feels very reverent. It's a film that feels very earthy.
Yes.
Like it feels like very damp and like overcast, very autumnal and like autumnal, but also kind of spring-like.
Yeah, I mean the thing is like this film also shifts from like certain type of like energies would be best to
Yeah.
say. And then you could also be like, it plays with the genre like at different times. You start with something that you know nothing about Arthur the first time you see him. You just see him talking he's on a train talking to
Was asleep.
he's asleep. He wakes up, is talking to these young women, seems charming, kind of soft spoken, only to get in a little bit of fight with someone where everybody like goes away from him.
Well, there's this sequence in that opening thing. Because remember, at first it opens with his dream.
Yeah.
So the first person we see is Benjamina,
Mm-hmm.
who we only ever see maybe once or twice more through the film. But it's he wakes up from his dream and he's surrounded by women. And that's something that I noticed through a lot of the movie. Arthur is often surrounded by large groups of women.
Yeah.
There's the train, there is Flora and her daughters, and then there's Italia and the commune she's living in. And those are kind of the three groups of women that he's around. And there's the conductor of the train, and he comes in, he asks to see Arthur's ticket, and Arthur hands him like a whole like A4 sized letter.
Yeah.
And you even hear one of the women in the train car go, "That's an odd ticket." And we just see the conductor's reaction to what he reads, and then he gives it back to Arthur. And then Arthur just wants to go back to sleep. And then it's the salesman.
He keeps talking about how bad he smells.
He comes up to the door and he starts making fun of Arthur in front of the women to impress them, to maybe get them to buy something. And says, "Oh, I don't know how you can stand the smell on this guy." And that's when you see, Arthur shift from seemingly innocuous to, "Oh, this guy's a little dangerous." He kind of like threatens to beat the shit out of the guy.
Well, especially because he tells the guy to stop and the guy continues.
Yeah.
And then you see, oh, he only has so much to offer before he snaps.
And so the film really it's Arthur is this onion that we're peeling the layers back from. And so you don't even really have a full picture of Arthur, I feel like, until like the last moments of the movie. And then you really are like, "Oh, I understand who this guy is." And he's such an interesting character. Apparently, Josh O'Connor is also in Luca Guadagnino's Challengers, which we'll be watching next week. And so I'm very interested to see, because this is my first experience with him, and I thought he was great.
Yeah.
I thought the character felt very real.
Yeah, it was very much an interesting thing because again, as we are not fluent Italian or Sicilian speakers of any type, or is it
I wasn't sure because there's another dialect that Italia speaks, and I can't by ear tell the difference if it's Neapolitan or Sicilian or some other, but I noticed the film gave her subtitles when she would switch to that dialect.
So you then realize afterwards when he engages with is it Pyro or Pedro? One of the guys.
Piero.
Like he tells him like don't waste your saliva because he comes to go pick him up. And he's like, "I taught you that verse." Like it's this you come to realize like, oh, Arthur is not native. He speaks like almost fluent
Italian.
Well,
I love the learning Italian with Italia.
Yes.
Which I also love that there's a character whose name here is literally the feminized version of Italy. So you're like, what is that about? And this is apparently part of a trilogy that Walker has done about Italy's past and present that are connected thematically.
Okay.
But the learning Italian and how it's not words, it's hand gestures.
Yes.
And so it almost becomes like these sign language scenes between them, which the film then also gives you subtitles for that, or it cuts to like things she's written notes down of like what this means.
Mhm.
And like I loved that sequence of it.
Yeah.
And that's another where you're talking about the energy of the movie shifting.
Yes. Because at times it almost felt a little Miranda July for me at times.
I was
So
thinking Wes Andersonian.
yes.
It feels like The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, where you have this central tragic figure who's surrounded by this ragtag crew.
Yeah, but it's a little more darker and
Yeah.
it's a little
Yeah,
bit
I'm not
more...
saying like tonally,
No,
but I'm
like
saying structurally, it's
because it turns out
yeah.
he has a ragtag group of people that really do care about him and
and
are
they're
just...
eccentric.
And then there's a whole song that someone is singing about the group
Yeah,
to explain further what's going on.
when they show up twice.
Yeah.
The second time they show up is on the second train ride where things get real weird and surreal. And that was where I started to realize, oh, is Arthur dead? And this has been his like journey to the underworld because his career is about searching out death.
Mm-hmm.
Like he raids tombs. So everything in his life is centered around death and disturbing where the dead have slept. And so it starts to make you realize, and it's one of those where you can read the film as everything is literal, or you can read it as this is like a fever dream of a dying man.
Yeah, or like he had a near-death experience, and then like after, because like when he does come back and he does encounter Italia, and then his friends are kind of ignoring him, it feels like he has come back to life. We just don't know where the fuck he went because his beard is thicker.
Well, think about it. He's dressed all in white. It's very messianic.
Yeah.
It is like a Christ figure he has disciples.
Yeah.
But instead of him emerging from the tomb, he raids other people's tombs.
Yeah.
So he is like an antichrist almost. And we were the interiors in this movie feel so lived in and real. I'm thinking specifically of like Flora's house.
That's like constantly dripping.
And like the walls, it feels like the stucco or whatever is like peeling and crumbling away. So her home, she's this old woman played by Isabella Rossellini. She's clearly in the last stages of her life. So he is in her tomb.
Yeah.
And she almost feels very mythic and like a goddess. And she has all these daughters who feel like, nymphs or muses or spirits or sprites or something.
Because they all have red hair. They all match within the hair color and like
and
eye color.
They all seem to be on the same page together with each other. And like they're trying to, and remember, like they're basically tomb raiders as well, because one of the last times we're in Flora's house, they have this big conversation about how Arthur is about influence and she needs to get rid of him because I believe Benjamina is her daughter.
Yeah.
And how one of the daughters comes up to her and she's holding a lamp that she's unplugged and go, "You don't use this, right?" And I immediately thought like, oh, they're a group of tomb raiders too. It just the person whose tomb they're raiding is still alive and their mother.
And it's like it's this thing that you can say that it feels like Flora disappears from the movie towards the end. But I think it's this implication that either she's passed away or her daughters have put her elsewhere because
he's cut off.
He's been cut off, and also because like the daughters get really annoyed with how he's allowed to smoke in the house, how they have found him they found him a job and he says no, and she's like he's allowed to do whatever the fuck he wants. And they're angry, and like we at first are kind of like confused because he just like that encounter, he had just come back. We don't know where he comes back from. We then learn that he was in prison. And we don't know what he was in prison for. So why would he be denying a job only for you to find out he raids tombs?
Yeah. And so I don't think they really spell it out 100%, but we can easily infer he got caught selling black market, like stolen artifacts.
Because at one point when he is like refusing to run away from the major tomb, one of the guys was like, "What, you liked prison that much?" And the most exposition we get is his song.
Yeah, where they just kind of detail what the tomboroli is what they call them, which I loved. I read Warwalker said she was so happy after Cannes because she said not everyone in Italy even knows that word, and now like all these people know this word. She was like, that was so great. There's a quote I found from her that goes with one of those impressionistic scenes. Expressionist, I think, is it impressionistic or expressionistic?
You're asking the wrong person, babe.
You're an art major. I thought you would know.
No, not an art major. Graphic design.
She said, I wanted to create an image of what capitalism is for me. And that image is that a bunch of dogs growling at each other and fighting with each other, where the small dog and the big dog are all the same. There isn't even that division anymore because between the buyer and the seller, they're all there to shout at each other, to growl at each other, all around a bone. Arthur takes away that bone from the world of commerce, from the world of the living, and he throws it in the water.
Yeah, that scene was fucking crazy. Like,
Well, and that's where I was like, oh, so much of this movie is in Arthur's head.
yeah.
And that's why I started to realize, oh, I don't think everything that's happening to Arthur is literal. I think everything that's happening to Arthur might not be literal at all. That this is his own passage into the underworld.
Yeah.
Um, I think the last minute of this movie is cinematic purity. It is everything that is compelling about movies boiled down to its essence. It is images juxtaposed in a way that brings this overwhelming meaning to what we've been watching without the director having to drop a single ounce of exposition. All we have to do is see darkness, a little light, a red piece of string, a face that we've seen before, and like you immediately you understand everything that this movie is communicating to you. And it's one of those like chilling endings where it's like it's sad but happy.
Yeah.
And it's so good. And then things that happen to characters along the way, like the way Italia is just kind of abandoned at the end.
Which is like sad, but it's also like this thing of it being like with Italia as a character. I like the fact that she is complicated where you don't know if like is she a good person or she's selfish?
When it's the whole thing is she has two children that she hides from Flora, who she works for,
Yeah.
and then eventually gets fired because they find them. And it's clear that the two children are from different fathers.
Yeah.
Because one of them appears to be she fathered with somebody of African descent.
Mm-hmm.
But what I loved is that that doesn't matter to Arthur. Like he's still in love with her. But it's also a film about dual love stories because he's falling in love with Italia, but he's in love with Benjamina. And for various reasons, he can't be with Benjamina.
Yeah, and it's also like the question, is he in love with Italia or is he just enjoying the attention that she's providing him? And it's obvious that she has feelings for him, but she's never clear as to what her expectations are, only to put upon him these ideals that like he never said that he agreed with, and he's not also telling her the whole truth about himself. So the infatuation could just be purely physical.
Well, that actress Carol Duarte, I thought she was so good.
Yeah.
She and Josh Connor were such a perfect pair because they were so odd in their own ways.
Yeah, I really like the fact that there's times that you don't know if they have chemistry until they fully show you
Yeah.
that they have very good chemistry.
It's a very strange and fascinating love story to watch.
Yeah.
Because it ebbs and flows and has ups and downs and is all over
And
the
it's
place.
ones that you're like not really, you think that maybe it's just gonna be her having a crush on him, especially with the Flora, how she introduces her about being like, she thinks she can sing, she cannot sing. And she's like there working, trying to sing. In reality, she can't. Like she cannot sing, but she is chasing these dreams because it feels good. But then you're also like you're hiding your children, you're putting them in this household, they're not welcomed. You're falling in love with a man that even though he's interacting with your kids does not mean that he would be a good father. It's you know nothing about him and then you get mad when you do find out who he is. It's
when it did feel like a reincarnation of Fellini. Like I was thinking a lot of Juliet of the Spirits.
well, is I think what really was impactful was even like that first train scene where he is left alone because like the women leave because they can't stand the fact that he got into a fight. He opens a window to kind of freshen up his the air, and he thinks that everyone's looking at him and there's an image that everyone is like they've peeked out.
Once again, that's in his head,
and
right?
it's such a Fellini shot because it's everyone at the same time.
It's very 8.5.
Only for them to disappear and it's just the dog staring at him.
Yeah. It makes me interested because I think she's directed at least I know for this trilogy she did about Italy, it's The Wonders and Happy as Lazzaro. And I'm once again sort of like with Lila Aviles. I'm like, yeah, they're on the list. I need to see these movies. Because I would say it's almost like Wes Anderson without becoming too twee. It's the same kind of characters you'd find in a Wes Anderson movie,
Yeah.
but the tone is not the same. So it's the same kind of like arcs and personalities. There's people that are larger than life, but the movie never like goes off the rails with that. So it's Rohrwacher has a very good sense of balance and constraint, and knows how when to get very silly, when a music cue should be completely uh out of sync with the rest of the movie, but perfectly works for a scene,
Yeah.
and when to like ground things in a very somber tone. And there's a big sense of the mythic. Like if I don't know exactly what she's going for because I haven't read as much about what her thoughts are on this trilogy, but if it's about Italy and its past and present, for me this film feels like an examination of how Italy is allowing capitalism to sell off its own history.
Yeah, it's basically like showing you here comes a colonizer, which is basically Arthur,
Yeah.
who comes in to discover the tombs, but he also gets help from locals to help him dig up the tombs. And then he has what it is a rich local, which is supposed to be
Flora. Spartaco.
Spartaco, who ends up buying most of it and then faking paper saying, oh, it was from an estate. It was, somebody had it at their homes.
Well, I think it was Rohrwacher talked about it. I forget which museum it was in New York that she'd heard a story where they illegally bought these two statues and then found out that they were fakes. And so they're hidden in the basement of this museum in New York because they can't admit it because it would be admitting they both committed a crime and they got tricked. And so she said she's so fascinated because she wants them on display because she's like, it's amazing art to me. There's a story behind this art, right?
Yeah.
It's a story that the museum doesn't want to deal with, but it's an interesting story. And so, yeah, would you recommend La Chimera?
Ooh, I think if you're gonna go in like full on, meaning don't expect it to be one thing or another. It shifts and changes on you, but it keeps I think
It moves at its own pace and tone.
yes, and it felt as if like it kept my attention the whole time while I'm learning who Arthur is, and not at the end. I don't end up being like, oh my god, I appreciate him as a person. You're kind of like, he's not the greatest of dudes, anyways.
He's very much an anti-hero kind of person.
But it is this like he becomes like a legend of sorts.
Well, it's the mythic thing, right? It's like
Yeah.
the only way that Arthur's story can end is if he becomes like these artifacts, right? He becomes a thing of myth.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a film that, once again, much like Totem, visually gorgeous. It's someone who they understand what a good film looks like, and then can also tell a very unique, captivating story. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pop Cult Podcast. Check the show notes for links to reviews or things we might have mentioned in this episode, including our website, popcult.blog. Make sure that you subscribe wherever it is you listen to podcasts so that you'll be notified when new episodes are up. If you visit popcult.blog right now, you're going to find that for April, we're in the middle of May. Forgot we're in a new month. We're in a series focused on director Ernst Lubitsch, who was directing films all the way back to the silent era, through the pre-code era, and into the post-code era. And it almost feels like discovering a whole world you didn't even know existed in these old movies that I think we have a lot of assumptions about and don't realize how modern they really were. If you enjoy what we do here on the podcast or on the website, we encourage you to support us on Patreon. We have lots of different reward levels to choose from. I want to thank our current patrons, Morphine and Ida, who donate at the sneak peek level, and Becca and Matt, who donate at the writer's room level. If you donate at that level or higher, you'll get to pick a movie every month for us to watch review. You can add your own thoughts to that review if you want. And no matter what level you join as a patron, you'll get access to patron-exclusive podcasts. We have a few series of those up now, with more to come in the future. Well, next week on the podcast, we will be reviewing Zendaya in Challengers and Juliette Binoche in The Taste of Things. Until next time, you keep listening, we'll keep watching.